Well, I am delighted to have one of my good friends and also an incredible guest on the show, Byron Williams. Byron is the National Clinical Outreach Specialist. I think I got that right for no matter what recovery, and also a person in recovery and just a really amazing person. And we are ready to dive in and have a great conversation. Welcome to the Element Q podcast. I'm your host, TJ Woodward, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this empowering journey. Each week, we shine a light on the authors, thought leaders, therapists, coaches, and healers of all types who are making a difference in the LGBTQ plus community. Together, we honor those who came before us, the courageous and resilient trailblazers who stood for our rights and recognition. Their strength laid the foundation we stand on today. Here, we celebrate their legacy by diving into the stories, insights, and tools that inspire gentleness, healing, and transformation. So get ready to be uplifted and empowered. This is the Element Q podcast. Byron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for asking me. I think this is our second time getting to jump on a call or video, and I just love you. I just love you.
Oh, well, I love you too, Byron. And I love who you are in the world. And I love our conversations that we've had over the years working together. And, you and I know the day we met, it was a really powerful day in Austin when I was doing a conscious recovery training at a facility where you were connected with, and we bonded instantly.
Oh
So
yeah.
thank you for who you are.
Thank you as well.
I'm excited about the conversation. As always, before we hit record, I asked you what's present for you, and I love that you said, let's just dive in and do some deep topics. And one of the topics that I am most passionate about, of course, is how we create deeper healing within the LGBTQ plus community. And when we look at healing, we might want to look at like not only how we heal it, but what needs to be healed.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of times that there's divisiveness, there's division that happens even within our community, matters of race, matters of gender identity. Maybe, gay men aren't understanding the trans experience. Maybe trans people have their own unique point of view about that, or maybe there's some judgment going around and around. I'm curious what you want to say about that to get the conversation started.
Yeah. I think when it comes to healing within the LGBTQ community, there's a misconception that we need to start healing from the noise outside when it's the noise within our community that we're not willing to hear, it feels like sometimes. And that's just been my experience. And for several different reasons. I, depending on where you want to go with this conversation, I can talk about what it's like growing up as a gay black man in Texas, in the Bible Belt specifically. But yeah, you let me know what you
Well,
want
yeah,
to know.
let's just go ahead and dive in and start there.
Yeah.
And for the
Okay.
record, I know you grew up in Dallas, and for the record, I have a strange affinity for Dallas because I got sober there and, I did some of my greatest damage and also some of my early healing there. So for whatever reason, I have just such a fondness for it. And I know you had kind of a different experience, but yeah, let's dive in. A gay black man in Dallas, or, specifically when it comes to, the Bible Belt, I'm using air quotes, but truly, your experience is something that I want to hear and learn from.
Yeah. Well, let's start with being black first.
Yeah.
You know,
Let's-
the first part of my life, I went to an all black chapter, what do you call it? Charter school, where I was bullied. I was bullied because I sound like this. I was bullied because I wanted to play patty cake and jump rope with the girls instead of basketball, which I was horrible at. I have a scar in my eyebrow to prove it because I fell. Um, And already I started to feel the divide. So that was my first experience of feeling divided amongst people that were like me. Fast forward, I jump into middle school and I'm in, a predominantly white area, not area, community, which I actually started to feel a little bit more closer to. The reason being is that I was different and that was okay for the most part. Well, for the most part, but you know what I mean? Um, and I didn't feel like, I don't know, I just felt more accepted. And it's the weirdest thing because it doesn't make sense. It should be the other way around. And as I've grown older, what I've noticed is the same experience I had as a kiddo is the same experience I have out in the world. You know, I still sound like this, I still look like this. And within the Black community, sometimes, most of the time, not most of the time, that's hyperbole. Um, I'm not accepted, you know. 16-year-old now gay Black man, now the distance is wider, but I'm also feeling the distance in another set of a community that I'm in. And TJ, you can tell me move forward facts because I can get stuck for a second, and I try not to do that. But yeah, as TJ mentioned, I grew up in technically Grapevine, but Dallas Fort Worth area. Um, and I moved away for a reason. You know, there's some gay Black men from Dallas that'll joke and say like all the men out there just want someone that looks just like them or someone that looks like they could be their brother. And as a person who at the time would date predominantly white men, the isolation and feelings of exile sometimes and the racism within our community, the queer community was so loud, so loud. And I noticed that difference for the first time when I was 23 years old, and I went to my little twink 23-year-old ass went to Chicago, and I went to Boys Town, and they were on me like on flies. White men, Hispanic men, like everyone. Well, I'm not making it sound like because I'm like, the- but like in comparison, like that was the feeling, you know? And it was very foreign to me. And then I noticed like there was such a huge difference. I don't know where I was going with that, but I do know where I was going with that. So I get back home and I continue the racial divide. And what I also start to notice is, you know, you go on the apps or the dating sites and you see I'm mask, I'm femme, I'm this. We've created so many subcategories within our community to separate ourselves. And what that did for me personally, it made me identity hop to some degree, especially in my early 20s. Okay, well, he doesn't like that I'm very Black, so I will sound more like doesn't like that I'm super femme, so I better just butch it on up and you know, and just become whatever I felt like the person I was after needed me to be. And I go back to that 16-year-old gay Black boy who just found out and he's wounded.
Mm.
He's very wounded. And I lived in that space for a long time. And sometimes it jumps up, but you know, years of therapy has really helped. But as we talk further to race within our community, if you go to Dallas, yeah, it's a mixed crowd, but you have I haven't lived there in a while. I want to keep that open. You know, you have one bar where it's mostly Hispanic and Black people, and I think it's called Havana or something like that. And then you go to S4, where there's a sprinkle of people that look like me, and a gaggle of, you know, non-people, me white people. I don't know why it's weird to say that. And then you just really kind of notice it and you feel it. Now I live in Austin, which is mostly different. I did meet my husband here, who is half white, half Mexican. And I see more interracial couples here than I do in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I want to make sure this is, I want to make it known that like this is purely what I've seen. If we take it a step further, I'm going to tell you right now, I've been guilty with everything, with the climate of the world, um, and how people have felt about trans people over the course of the past 10 years, as I feel like there's been more of a coming out for trans people, which I love. But, you know, 5 years ago, I didn't love it. I didn't understand. And I'm just being completely honest. I don't want to say I was a part of the group that was, let's keep the LGB. But there were some practices in my, not practices, ideologies in my head that made me say, hey, we went backwards because of you.
Mm.
And I really hate to admit that, and it hurts my heart because I love trans people. I love, there's a freedom about a trans person that I don't know that I'll ever touch. I don't know if that makes sense, but um, back then I was really ignorant. I couldn't like understand. I couldn't understand the fact that what they're experiencing right now is what gay people were experiencing, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. So it's just moved on to a different set of people. But as a gay man, I didn't hear that. All I heard, honestly, it came down to selfishness. All I heard was, more conservative people, culturally don't like me now when I thought they were starting to like me.
Mm.
Um, again,
I love the layers of what you're bringing up, and I think there's so many different avenues we can go down, and I would love to explore some of them because I think the deeper conversation here is how much of the healing is internal. You know, you talked about years of therapy, talked about the impact on, and for the record, Grapevine and Dallas are very different experiences, so it helps me to realize that you were there. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, the joke is, you stay in three zip codes there, and then you have a pretty, great experience. But moving on beyond our conversation about Dallas, and I lived there a long, long time ago, for the
yeah,
record. Yeah, way before you were born. But I think it's important to talk about the internal work and also the work of healing within community because I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think where a lot of times, and I'll put it in the I, where I have gotten in trouble is wanting the world to change so that I could be free. And I did that for about a decade or so in my 20s. And, I was the one that was like, quote unquote, fighting for rights. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. The issue, though, is the deeper healing is always within the community, and then ultimately within ourselves. It doesn't mean that things aren't happening. And I think that's the important distinction because, yeah, there's all kinds of things happening in the world. But when you talk about your experience as a young person, I grew up back in those days, in the 1970s, I was a kid. So coming out in the 80s, in Dallas, coincidentally. But, the experience of what it was like to be seen as something that was inadequate. And you talked about the different roles. I mean, today we call it intersectionality, right? But I love that you also leaned into these mask femme roles, what it means. And then we have the trans experience now, we have the non-binary. And I only say now, not because trans people haven't always existed, because they have, but it's been a conversation that's been elevated over the last, decade or so. So grateful for that. And yet I also do hear sometimes people, wanting or having some judgment, just having
yeah.
some judgment. So there's a lot to unpack here. Where do you want to go with this conversation in terms of like, how do we start to heal? Because I think that's really the conversation I'm interested in having. We can see the issues, we can see the divisiveness. I honor that you're talking about this intersectionality, right? And playing roles, because
Yeah.
that really to me is the early experience, at least my early experience of being a little gay boy in Indiana in the 1970s, and having to pretend to be someone who I wasn't. And where do
Yeah.
I fit in?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. It's crazy because within our community, the alphabet soup, um, we scream for freedom and acceptance. But we don't look inward, and that's obviously what we're talking about. We don't look inward and realize that we're like, okay, but not for those people. And sometimes it's subconscious. And you ask like, what do we do? And personally for me, where I started to heal and soften and be compassionate and join was when I was honest with myself. Like I just told you, you know? And for me personally, it came down to selfishness, you know? It came down to I just want people that look like me to be free. Yeah, so the other gay people too, you know what I mean? The other bi people too, but it was fear of what I don't understand, you know? And as the more trans people that I've become friends with and gotten to know and gotten to work with most professionally and personally, it's all just made sense for me. I just had to go and be honest and ask why. And I'm so curious to know, like, if we brought everyone from the LGBTQIA plus community in one room and we stripped the fear of like, what are they gonna think? Are their feelings gonna be hurt? We strip that. I mean, this is just a magical, magical world I'm thinking of. Um, I wonder how much healing will happen then. It,
It's so interesting because I think that's what's required for healing. And we're sometimes afraid to talk about race. We're sometimes afraid to talk about the judgment. We're sometimes afraid to ask questions. I might be afraid to ask a trans person a question because I'm afraid I'm going to ask it wrong, right? And I think when it comes to race within our community, well, the world, but within our community, it's something that we shy away from. I'm always willing to have the conversation. I recently did our emergence conference and we did a panel discussion on moving beyond the fight. And I knew there would be some kind of pushback on that because I wasn't saying there was anything wrong with the fight. I'm just asking how we can like honor that and then move beyond it into true healing because the fight can only get us so far, right? And then this idea that we're afraid to talk about things or I'm afraid to ask you about race, that's what keeps us separate. That's what keeps it in the unconscious. So I love it. I say the more truly safe spaces, not safe spaces as it's defined today, which is let's all come together and agree with one another, but let's come together and honor and allow for the difficult questions.
yeah, absolutely. You brought up race, and I feel like this is such a Russian doll conversation. You know what I mean? Um, Race. I was just having this conversation the other day at a recovery conference, the Crystal Meth Anonymous conference, predominantly gay men, women, trans, all the whole alphabet soup. Um, Lovely weekend. But I had a conversation with someone, and they were like, "Hey, I went to this sex party one time, and I wanted to invite my handsome black friend, and they said no blacks allowed." you know. And when you said that, it started to dawn on me, in my single days when, I was, involved in some risky sexual behaviors, both before sobriety and sober. I had experiences where I would say hello to someone, and there was one time I'll never forget it. Um, One, he was a person in recovery, supposedly. Well, maybe he was. He was in another fellowship that I'm in, a different one that I'm in, I'm sorry. And he just outright said, "Yeah, I don't do black people." But he didn't stop the conversation. It was almost like he got like some type of excitement out of it. So I started to say, "Hey, you're entitled to your opinion." I thought the conversation would end. No, he then goes on and on. And I asked him, I was like, "You're a person in recovery, right?" Um, we operate on a set of values, right? Or at least we're supposed to. Use that, you do you, whatever your recovery process. But anyways, just based off of the recovery journey he told me he was on, his actions and his words didn't align. There was no compassion. Look here, I'm not sitting here talking about racial division within our community and saying you have to go and like every part of the UN. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is, can we recognize the divide and can we ask ourselves why we have it?
Yes.
And that's where my healing started. And that's when that 16-year gay, freshly coming out gay Byron started to heal and emerge more. And I'm able to talk about it more. I've had other experiences where I've been invited to a sex party by another friend, and they were like, they didn't say it outright, but I heard it. You know what I mean? And I'm not that type of person to be like, that's racist. I don't do that. I just don't. But I'll call a spade a spade.
Well, and I think it's important to have the conversation. I mean, one of the things that I look at my own journey and growing up where I did, people, and I'm going to be on my tiny bit of a soapbox, but people talk about the South being so racist, but Indiana is where the KKK started. That's where I grew up. And so moving from there to Dallas was like light years in the future, which maybe is why I also have a fondness for it, right? Because I did meet more people of different races, different ethnic backgrounds, different life experiences, different religions. I mean, but my earliest response, I mean, actually, I'll say reaction to what I perceived to be racism was to be in the fight, like to stand for, pulling the car over and telling people to get out of my car because I can't have that poison. And like, there's a place for that. Like, I don't want to be present with it, but I realized that I hadn't done a lot of the deeper work. And it came years later, and it's been a gradual process for me to take a look at like, what did I absorb? How did I reconcile the grandfather who I loved, who used the N word every single day and was okay with me being gay, but not okay with my sister having a black boyfriend? Not okay, period. What did I do with that? How much did I absorb? Was my deflection a defense strategy? But did I really take a deeper look? And honestly, COVID, George Floyd, all of that, being in a relationship, my husband is mixed race, and we had opportunities. I had an opportunity to pause and reflect and look deeper. Um, I thought, there's no way I have any racist ideas because I've dated people of color. I've been so open. I've stood for equality. But oh, wow, there was some stuff in there. And there was some stuff around how I perceived myself, how I perceived my relationship with my husband, how I perceived my relationship with the world. And I think the one thing that was so glaring to me during that time was it was my responsibility, and this is true for me, not for anyone else listening. You might not relate to this, but I needed to pause, stop talking, and really look at what was happening deep within my unconscious and subconscious. What were my ideas? I had a lot to work on, and it was a beautiful opportunity to do so, as painful as it was, because my husband Will, and I had some very difficult conversations during that time. They were healing, but they were really difficult too.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that because it sparked even more vulnerability for me. And I say that like in a perfect world, every member of the queer community would sit down in a room and get honest and rip it off. But I had to do the same with the committee inside of me. And what I came to realize being in there's self-hatred that lived within me. And I it wasn't until maybe in the past 6 years that I started to dive into why am I only attracted to white men? I started to dive into that. And if I ask myself when we dissect it, the fear already from being bullied when I was a kid by black people, they don't like me. I go into now, more public school, predominantly white, and I feel more accepted, right? I feel like, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be.
Mm.
I fit in, I should assimilate. You know what I mean? Um, as I got older, I just realized, okay, well, how do I explain it? There was internalized racism because of my own personal experience and because of what I saw to be the right way, which was the white way for me,
Yeah.
you know. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, that hurt my heart. It really hurt. And I want to make it clear, part of the reason I can identify these problems is because I lived them and I was the problem. I wasn't, overtly loud about it, but it lived within me, you know. Some people say like, when you spot somebody, you spot it, you got it. You know what I mean? And I had that experience and I didn't want to be honest with myself about it. And there was a lot of healing and understanding that not all black people hate me, you know. Not all white people accept me. Not all people accept me. It's not a race problem, it's a people problem, you know? And that was hard for me to understand. And suddenly I see the beauty in chocolate. Suddenly I see the beauty in
I
chocolate.
woke up to a different possibility.
I woke right on up. And here's the problem living in Austin. There are no black people. Where are y'all? If you're listening from Austin, please come see me. Where are y'all? And I love all my friends. I love them. They're predominantly white. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there is something wrong with it. You know, I was out to brunch last week and I was with a really good friend, and it was technically also a work meeting because she's, you know, a colleague and perfect. But we wanted to take a picture outside the restaurant, and there's three beautiful black women enjoying brunch, and I'm just looking at them. I'm like, sis, you are gorgeous. So she takes our picture and I just can't stop like complimenting her and I just feel so connected. And so we go back in and in my head I'm like, oh my God, we exist here. There's some here. And we're pulling out. I'm gonna drive my friend back to her car, which was kind of far, and I'm pulling out and I see them. I stop in the middle of the parking lot and I get out of my car and I'm like, hi, my name's Byron. I want to be y'all's friend. They live in Houston.
I was
They live in Houston.
It's so funny. I was actually going to say, if you want that diversity, go to Houston,
Or
right? Because
Houston.
I did a training actually at Park, which and I sometimes like to be slightly provocative when I do my posts, but I said I always love being in Texas in our field because I love the enthusiasm and the diversity. And a picture tells a thousand words because, California, we tend to think, oh, we're so open, but within our field, it's almost all white people in our field.
Yeah,
Almost. Like, I mean, 90%.
yeah,
I was in San Francisco for years, supposedly the most open city, but like, again, where are the black people, right? They're over in Oakland. So, like, it's very, very interesting how that type of unconscious or unspoken segregation or separation happens, right?
yeah,
Even when you talk about that in Texas, like, yeah, Houston is the place that has more black people. Like it's
yeah,
very, very interesting. Or Atlanta, right? Going to Atlanta, it's like mind
yeah,
blowing. So we're still in that paradigm in so many ways. And, obviously I cannot possibly know what that experience is like. And yet I can relate it to my own. You talked about that deeper work of realizing it was still there for you, right? I remember when I was 40 and doing sort of my graduate program of spiritual studies. I did a 5-year program and I got to meet my own internalized homophobia in a way that I didn't know was still there. And this is at 40 years old because of the early brutalization, quite frankly, of don't throw like a girl, don't act like a girl, don't talk like a girl. Like it wasn't homophobia. First, it was misogyny. And I remember just like pretending to be someone I wasn't, but how deeply I buried it's not okay to be me. And then reflected in the community, the hyper attractiveness of masked men, right?
mhm,
I think it gets projected outward. I'm thinking of my friend Alan Downs in his book, The Velvet Rage. Shame gets expressed outward a lot in our community, and there's like this hypermasculinity that becomes the object of desire. I know we've done a lot of healing in the last 10 years or so with, you know, more trans visibility, more non-binary visibility, and yet it still was for me an internal process. So when I hear you say, I had an experience that, of course, is always valid. Black people don't like me. I want to assimilate with white people. That affects the way you see the world, right? And as we heal, it's like, oh, it's not, as you said, it's not the whole story, but it was my whole story.
yeah,
It wasn't okay to be a little femboy, even though like we didn't have that term back then. So I kind of like tried to become more masked. So, I know the experience of being a black person is different than being a gay person. And in your case, you get both. And I say
yeah.
get, I know that probably hasn't always, as you've shared, not an easy journey. And yet the healing of those two, I am just so fascinated by. And I have so much respect for you in
Thank
that
you.
you're willing to talk about this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's I feel like I don't have to hide my blackness with my white friends anymore. And if I do, I refuse to. I celebrate who I am. And I feel, it's crazy. I sat in the victim seat and thought, black people hated me, but it flipped.
Yeah.
It flipped. And I didn't realize I had such an aversion to my people because of what I assumed they thought of me. The whole time I'm judging them. I'm saying, hey, I'm a elevated black man. What? What? Well, again, it's like you spot it, you got it, but you got to be honest with yourself. I had to get real, had to get true. The way I learned more about trans people was by talking to trans
That's right.
people. The way I accepted trans people and understood is by talking to trans people instead of making assumptions and being fearful. The way I started to ease the tension of being afraid of my blackness was by sitting with black people. you know, in my blackness. That's been really fun. But it's just such an interesting thing. The paradigms, I mean, not paradigm, it's paradoxical. I think that's the word, right? Yeah, it's, whatever. Where they're both, they're both tricks and fame. Anyways,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I get kind of revved up about this because the healing behind it feels fiery.
Yeah.
And I can feel it right here when I talk about it. It's almost every time there's just a layer um, of self that's being more revealed, and that's the whole point of this. My sobriety, my recovery, I don't believe it'd be sustainable had I not had these realizations and these experiences, and um, and it's not over. It's not over at all. And suddenly these are the people that I judge so much, I crave to be around.
Mm,
Those are the people I crave to be around. Um, there's something I was going to say surrounding just oh yeah. I go, the circuit party scene, right? At one point I was hot and I was big and I was on steroids and I was just like chiseled and stuff. And I got into the circuit party people and I was hanging with them, the Instagram pictures, like, hey bro. And that's when super mask, clearly, because I look that way and that's the part I have to play, right? I always notice, whoa, I'm the only one. And by the only one, I'm like the black guy. And then, sometimes I look at these pictures, and it's again, it's not across the board. It's just from my experience, what I see, particularly in Texas. There's always just one. There's always just one. The token hire. The token hire.
yeah.
Um, but what's so sad is like I'm a feeler and I feel like I can really feel people. I see it in the eyes. I'm like, I had that stare before.
Yeah.
I've had that stare. I've had that. I'm glad I made it to in the picture. You know what I mean? And that just hurts my heart. And I wish I could grab everybody and yeah. Whew.
Well, let me say something, Byron, because we're coming to a close of the conversation. What I feel you just did in this interview is grab some heart, because that's the way we start to heal this. It is important that we have these conversations. It is important for me that I move beyond my fear of saying something or being perceived in a certain way to have the courage to talk about it. And what I have witnessed in our last 30 minutes in this conversation is not only so much courage, but also so much inner strength to be able to say, I think it's important that we talk about this so that we can begin individually and within our community and then globally to heal. And that's my life's mission. And I know that you're doing that and demonstrating that in such a beautiful way. So I would love to have you back again for part two sometime. But let's just, if you have anything in closing you want to say to anyone, of course, everyone, Byron's bio will be in the show notes, along with more information about No Matter What Recovery, which is a phenomenal LGBTQ plus treatment program in LA. But anything you want to say in closing, Byron?
Um, I think if you felt a tingle or felt anything and you even had a little bit, even just a little bit, um, ask yourself why you have it and get honest. And if you need to say it out loud for the first time to the wall, not even the mirror, because you're too afraid to look at yourself, do it. Because that's where it starts. At least that's where it started for me. And that's okay. And that's absolutely okay. You're not a bad person for recognizing your racism within yourself. You're not a bad person for realizing that you're homophobic. But yeah, that's all I have.
Beautiful. My goodness. My heart feels so full right now, Byron. So thank you. And of course, everyone, if this conversation, because I know some of you are having that tingling sensation about resonating with this conversation, please like and share. I think this message from Byron is an important one. And I just feel so honored that I got to be a part of the conversation. So thank you, Byron, very much. Peace and blessings, everyone. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Element Q podcast. It's an honor to walk this path of healing and transformation with you. Remember, the courage and resilience of those who came before us live on in each of us. Let's continue to carry their legacy forward as we support one another in creating a world filled with love, gentleness, and empowerment. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we're building a brighter future, one story at a time. Until next time, I'm TJ Woodward, and this has been the Element Q podcast.